let me throw another name of another club into the mix here. I spoke to Messrs Bowley and Igbali at the weekend at Wembley. Not about this, I hasten to add. Reports this morning that Chelsea's Premier League rivals believe the club must make major sales by the 30th of June, Stefan, to avoid breaching profit and sustainability. With £100 million worth of sales needed. Is that right? I mean, club sources refute that figure and stress any early sales would be done with making signings in mind rather than avoiding PRS matters. But is that accurate?
Well, it sounds like they watched our deadline day discussion on this, because
when you and I were on,
we specifically talked about the need for it to be 100 million, and I only used that number anyway because it was a round number.
You stand by it?
Well, the reality is it's higher than 100 million. And by the way, in that piece that you're talking about, it misunderstands what 100 million is. It's not 100 million gross. It's not saying, oh, just somehow sell Mudryk for 50 and everything's okay. It's talking about profit. We're talking about selling £100 million of profit under the way in which the Premier League rules work and on PSR. And that means, as we all know, either selling your best young players or selling players that somehow have got an amortised value, a net book value, which is lower than the sale price. What it doesn't mean is that you can go out and sell Lukaku for 38 million and think that you've done a good deal. You've made nothing selling Lukaku for 38 million, nothing at all, because even he is probably impaired on the balance sheet, but even if he is, 38 million is not going to make you a profit on Lukaku. And that's even if you could sell him before 30th of June, and I suspect they can't.
So you need pure profit here. Chelsea need pure profit.
Need profit.
So does that mean we're in the grounds of them selling like Conor Gallagher to achieve pure profit?
Well, look, let's be fair to them. First of all, they deny that they need to sell anybody at all, actually. So they say that they're completely in line with PSR for the current season, and they don't need to sell anybody at all. I say, looking at the numbers, and anybody can do the numbers, it's not that complicated to see that they're going to have a severe problem, because in a number of these pieces, it also says that they only just managed to pass 22-23. Well, if they only just managed to pass 22-23, it tells you that they were at minus 105 for that 3-year rolling period. So when you drop off that third year back, and then you start to assess, you know that you've got 2 years of heavy loss. And we know for certain that this year, given that they've got no European football whatsoever, we know for certain that they've made a loss. So I don't see how they argue they don't need to sell anybody, but let's say for somehow they argue that the sales of Mason Mount, of Hall to Newcastle, Livramento's 12 million quid sell-on fee, maybe they say that that's got them where they need to get to. I very much doubt it, and I think they have a very big deficit to find. I think they've now left it extremely late to find the profit, and you've got complexity with that, not least the fact that Gallagher is going to be out of contract in a year's time. By the time you get to June, you've got the Euros, and of course, as it says in that piece, every other club, and as we discussed actually on transfer deadline day, the Premier League teams that are probably the likely buyers for these players, they're not stupid. You know, we know the likely buyer for Gallagher is Daniel Levy and Spurs, and we know his approach is going to be to squeeze as hard as possible. And so if Chelsea want to get a player out the door by 30th of June, other teams are going to take advantage of it. And that's why I say I think it is unlikely that if they do need to sell £100 million of players to make £100 million of profit, I think it is unlikely they'll be able to do it. But let's see.
If it is unlikely that they can do it, what does that mean?
Well, it means they're
going to push profit.
It means.
And here we go again.
Here we go again.
It will be points deduction again, and they'll appeal and try and get the points reduced.
But well, they might try. But let's be clear on this. The authorities are now clearer in terms of how you work out what the penalty might be. They're not binding, but they're likely to be followed next time round. We also know that in Chelsea's case, there is definitely going to be issues around aggravating from the recklessness of the spending. And we also know that the pressure that's going to be ramped up by all the major clubs in the country is going to be enormous, such that any independent commission, it will do its best to be independent, but it is going to be faced with a lot of people saying it has to be more serious than Everton. And I think the breach is going to be much bigger than 20 million anyway.
Do you think Chelsea will have any case to put forward on the pivoting of the Premier League to change the depreciation terminology term? Because I felt that Chelsea, whatever contract they want, if the rules are you depreciate over the contract period, and they want to put players on 8 or 9 year contracts, more fool them. But
Correct.
That's their gift. And all of a sudden, in the middle of that, because of a lobby, the Premier League changed their position on that and said you can't have players for longer than a 5 year contract. That would be an argument that Chelsea will run, won't it?
Well, it won't help them because I'm talking about the assessment of 23-24 being on the basis of their policy, so 7-8 years. If it was done on 5 years...
Didn't they change it 18 months ago? Didn't they change it in January of last year?
They changed it for transfers after the date. So, in essence, Chelsea have made very few signings, if any, after the date. So Chelsea will still have the benefit.
I thought they changed it in January 23 and Chelsea spent another 300 or 400 million quid in the August window.
No.
It boils down to this, Stefan. By June 30, they've got to get rid of a sizable number of players to bring in more than 100 million quid or else...
Of profit.
Of profit. Is that achievable?
Well, so again... You can form a list. So you could say, well, we'll sell Gallagher for 50. Just in theory, we'll sell Gallagher for 50.
Right.
We'll sell Matson for his release fee at 35. We'll sell Brozier to Fulham for 40, whatever his release fee is. And then, you're broadly there. Those players are pure profit. You are broadly there. But does anybody really believe that those 3 players are going for those fees before 30th of January? I would suggest, and it suggests in the article, that the whole of the football world is fully aware of this situation and will not bail Chelsea out to that extent. But we'll see. The period is not finished. So let's be fair to Chelsea. At the moment, they may well pass PSR for 23-24. It is sort of possible. I think, and I've always said, I think it is highly unlikely, but it is possible.
Okay. Dan is a big Manchester United fan. Good morning, guys. This is a fascinating listen. With regards to Chelsea, is this where Saudi Arabia steps forward and bails Chelsea out? I don't know the answer to that, Dan. Simon, you still think that Chelsea will avoid being in breach? Am I right?
I don't think they'll be avoided by being in breach by not selling players. I think that's an absolute cast iron fact. They're going to have to sell some players. I don't necessarily concur with the view that the only game in town, if Daniel Levy's the only game in town, you'll get what Daniel Levy's prepared to pay. If you've got players that are a product that other people want, you can create some competitive tension. You might have to take a view on some of the prices. And of course, we've seen that there's a backdoor into Saudi. Whether we understand the complexity of the relationship, some of the funding that Clear Lake have has come from Saudi sources, so we understand there's a dynamic of a relationship there. So whether their transfer window opens on July the 1st, they can do deals that will be able to find a way around it. I do think they've got to sell 100 odd million pounds worth of players in terms of profitability, not in terms of gross receipts. And I do think they've got the resources to be able to do that. The argument they're advancing, they don't have to do it. Look, private equity guys are either good or bad. They're either completely wrecking of business because they haven't got a clue what they're doing, or they're very diligent.
Right.
And they'll be one or the other.
Yeah, right. Stefan, you wanted to come in.
Well, I just think the Saudi thing could be a bit of a red herring, because if we're talking about selling players like Gallagher, Matson, Brozier, these sorts of
I'm not talking about
the young players,
they're not going
to go, right?
No.
So, and Lukaku, it's very unlikely that from a fair value perspective, that people don't say something if they try and sell Lukaku for more than his book value.
Right. Stefan, I think this key question, and I've saved it till last, because I think we've got to let the impact of your answer, which I predict the nature of your answer may take a bit of digesting. Could we seriously have a situation, Stefan, where we still may have an asterisk next to the names of Everton and, say, Nottingham Forest come the final game or after the final game of the season?
Well, look, I think we know that Notts Forest is going to be heard on the 7th and 8th of March. Now, what's interesting there is that the Everton hearing was 5 days and the Notts Forest hearing, we believe, is 2 days, which suggests that it's a simpler case. That may mean that the decision comes quicker, and it may mean that any subsequent appeal is quicker. But let's assume that it's the same timescale as Everton. You've then got a situation where the distance between the hearing and the judgment is around about a month, right, which takes you to the beginning of April. Let's say Notts Forest decide they want to appeal, which they're almost certainly going to do, almost whatever the penalty, because there's no downside risk of an appeal. So you then need to give everybody the opportunity to prepare for the appeal, which must take a minimum of, let's say, 3 weeks. Now, the Premier League's own standard directions has the final date for an appeal hearing to be heard on the 24th of May. Well, we've just learned that it takes, again, approximately 4 weeks for an appeal board to come out with its decision, which takes you to the end of June. So, obviously it all depends on when these hearings are. If you take Forest, let's say, best case, they get a decision by the 7th of April, they have an appeal at the end of April, the appeal then decides its verdict by the end of May, and that's your best case, right? End of May. We don't know when Everton 2 is. But the worst case, as per the Premier League's own timetable,
right,
is that the appeal hearing to be heard on or before the 24th of May, and we are saying that it takes approximately 4 weeks to get the judgment on the back of that. I think it was more than 4 weeks, by the way. I think it was 5 weeks. But let's say 4 weeks for the appeal decision. On the Premier League's own timetable, it's way past the end of the season. You're into the Euros.
I was just going to say, this man and I could be in Germany, and we are hearing out there, these are the final Premier League standings. Is that honestly what we're saying?
Well, you can do
the math.
You've got a calendar yourselves.
The key equation is obviously if Nottingham Forest get 4-point penalty and they finish 5 points outside the bottom three, then it doesn't really make a lot of difference, does it?
Well, it depends if there's any points.
That's my point.
Any places.
That's
with that
that's an
point.
argument, isn't it? That's a £2.5 million argument. That's a compensation argument, isn't it?
Fine.
How much has this been a learning curve for these clubs? Are they going to learn a lot about what to do and what not to do in the world of finance? I know that sounds naive, Simon, but after all said and done, you've got to stay on the right side of this.
Look, we know that those Premier League meetings, Simon knows better than me, they're like an episode of Traitors. Everybody sits around the table smiling at each other, and everybody is legitimately, looking after their own position. So what would the learnings be? Well, most of those clubs around the table will say, we aren't going to breach these rules, so actually we should make them as stringent and as difficult as possible. And it's for the clubs that breach to suffer the consequences of that. The difference here, of course, is that the consequences of not knowing the final league positions go beyond the teams that have done anything wrong. So Luton Town could well be in a situation where they're waiting for this decision and don't know if they've survived or not. And that would seem to me to be unbelievably harsh on Luton Town. But I just don't see how it can be avoided.
The Premier League cannot allow that, can they?
Well, there's not a lot they can do about it. The process is already being streamlined, and what we're now seeing is a sophistication of thinking, and we'll see a sophistication of thinking over a period of time with financial fair play, because financial fair play is now being wielded as a proper consequence for people's behaviour. So there is process. Some of the clubs, the clubs are complicit themselves. First of all, they voted for these rules, so they've got to take responsibility for them. Second of all, the clubs often take their time getting themselves into being prepared. The question is, why did it take from November the 17th till February to hear the appeal for Everton?
Yeah.
And maybe that's because Everton took that amount of time to prepare themselves for that hearing.
But judging by this, Simon, we might be in the crazy situation, Stefan, of Luton Town fans, for argument's sake. The last ball is kicked in the Premier League. They've survived. These fans go on holiday, come back, they're down.
I mean, there's only one answer, which is yes. I mean, that at the moment, that looks a distinct possibility.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.